In this video, we're going to preview every single NFL game for this weekend. And also, I'm going to show you how you can take this model and create your own NFL lines. Greatly appreciate you guys tuning in to today's video. My name is MGCovers. You're watching this video for the first time and you want to learn how to get better at sports handicapping. This is an excellent time to subscribe to the channel. Not a lot of free plays on this video, but we do give out a ton of content on how to improve as a sports handicapper. You can also follow me on Instagram, MGCovers, cover spelled with the Z as well. Let's dive into this. This particular model that you're looking at, this is what we call a subjective model. With a subjective model, what that means is we're not using actual stats. Why? Because we don't have any data. All we have is the preseason, but no actual data. So we have to use a lot of subjective factors, coaching, quarterback, off-season trades. We can use some data from the previous year to kind of get an idea of what might potentially happen. But basically, a subjective model is not using any stats. And conversely, an objective model, we're going to use stats. But what we're going to do with this subjective model, we take all those subjective factors and rank each team so that we're able to get the difference between a good team and bad team. Let's take a look at this model. What I've done is I've ranked every team, and you'll see the top team, San Francisco, we've given them a number of 32. And there's 32 teams in the NFL, and I'll talk about why I did that in just a second. So let's just look at, say, the top 10. We have San Francisco, number 1, Buffalo, 2, Kansas City, 3, Detroit, 4, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Miami, Houston, Green Bay, and Cincinnati. So those are our, quote, good teams. And we go down here to the bottom. Let's look at the bottom 5. I have Carolina, Giants, Denver, New England, and Las Vegas. When you're looking at a power ranking model, there's basically 3 ways to play this. Number 1, you can just play the top teams. Our top teams, San Francisco, Buffalo, KC, Detroit, Baltimore. So you could just play the top 5 teams irregardless of the spread. Or you could simply play against the bottom teams, Carolina, Giants, Denver, New England, Las Vegas. Or the third option would be maybe a combination of those things and then factor in the difference between those teams. Now, if we slide over to the actual games here, you'll see the very first game, Baltimore and Kansas City, which is the game tonight. And this is pretty cool because in the video, I talked at the beginning of it, I talked about how you could actually steal my lines. This is how you would do it. If you give the top team a ranking of 32, the next team 31, so on down. So the last team, which is Carolina for me, they would get a 1 point. And then to create a line, you just take the power ranking and subtract it from each team's power ranking, and you come up with a line. So Kansas City's power ranking, you see over here, is a 30. In Baltimore, we have a 28. 30 minus 28 is Kansas City minus 2. That's basically the line. Let's do the same for Green Bay. In Philadelphia, we have Philadelphia at 27. We have Green Bay at 24. And you take 27 minus 24 is Philadelphia minus 3. Now we go over to the actual lines at the sports books. Okay, cool. I was making sure you guys could see that. You will see that it's basically the same line. Kansas City is minus 3. We have it at minus 2. Philadelphia is minus 2. And then our line is minus 3. So those lines are very close to the sports books lines. Now, this is important to note, especially those of you that aspire to build models. For the most part, you want your lines to be very similar to the sports book lines, because that shows that when there is a discrepancy between your line and the book's line, that generally means it's probably going to be a good play. If your lines are way off compared to the sportsbook lines, it's generally an indication that the model's not going to be legit. So that's actually a good thing that our lines are very similar to the sportsbook lines here, because this way, when we do see variance, we'll know more than likely that's a pretty good play. So those first 2 games we're looking at, I would say there's just not enough value to justify a play, really. You might could make a case for, Kansas City and Philadelphia. It's moved in their favor a half point. Both Kansas City opened 2.5, now it's 3. Philadelphia opened at 1.5, now it's 2. Both those teams are at home, so that sort of makes sense in a way. But I really look at these games as 50-50 games, meaning like there's not really significant enough margin to justify a play. And it's the same that I do with my power rankings for baseball. You can see here, anytime we have a top team playing another top team, it's simply a pass. Because again, we don't have enough variance to justify a play. The only thing I would do is I would classify these as 50-50 games. So if anything, that would favor the dog in those cases. And what I mean by that, let's go back over to Baltimore and KC. So if anything, and you made me play these first two games of the season, I would probably play Baltimore money line and Green Bay money line. So you'd only need to win one of those to be profitable, if that makes sense. That's not my recommendation, but if I was going to play those games, that's how I would structure those wagers. Sunday's games, and we'll go back to the power rankings here. You can see we have Carolina as the worst team via my power rankings. We've given them a 1. New Orleans, very close to Carolina, and we have a differential of 6. Next, take a look at Tennessee, Chicago. We have Chicago at 16, Tennessee at 8. So we have a line of Chicago -8. And then one we're going to really focus on here, we have Houston high up in our power rankings. We have Indy basically somewhere in the middle. Houston is 25 -14. That gives us an 11-point differential for Houston. So let's slide over back to our actual lines. You can see there they have New Orleans is favored. We have New Orleans favored as well, but not enough value. Same deal with Tennessee, Chicago. Chicago, that line is -4. Our line is basically -8. So we do have a little bit of value on Chicago. I still wouldn't feel comfortable suggesting that as a play, simply because we don't look at Chicago as a, quote, good team. And this is important. I want to make this point. Let's go back to the power rankings real quick, and we'll look at some of these top teams. If you look at San Francisco, Buffalo, KC, Detroit, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Miami, Houston, Green Bay, Cincinnati, all those teams have good quarterbacks, good coaches, and majority of those teams were in the playoffs last year. So they're predictable. Now, again, not all these, I don't think you could say it's likely that all of those teams will perform well this week. All of those teams will win and cover. We can't necessarily assume that, but we have a greater margin of predictability with those teams as opposed to some of these teams in the middle at the bottom. And let me give you a great example with my Washington Commanders. It's very difficult for me to say Commanders, by the way. I'm a long Redskin fan. Jaden Daniels, great quarterback. However, we do not know how he's going to perform on Sunday. And let me give you two scenarios. If I told you right now, Jaden Daniels would go out, he's going to throw for 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions in his season debut, the majority of you listening to this, watching this video would believe that, right? What if I told you he goes out in his season debut, the other option, and he throws for 200 yards, has 2 interceptions, they lose 28-14, he has a pick 6. The majority of you watching this would believe that too, right? You would say, okay, that's his season debut, and there's a huge margin of error. And if you play or focus on some of these bottom tier teams in NFL, there's a greater margin of error, a greater margin of unknown, I guess you should say, as opposed to playing just these top teams, which again is my philosophical change here in the last, I guess, 6 months with regards to model. The line is not as important as basically focusing on these top teams in your model that have significant value over, say, a middle team or a bottom tier team. So let's go back to look at Houston right there, 25, Indianapolis is 14. So we have an 11-point margin there. We'll take a look at the line, and you can already see this is a really good play. We have Houston -2.5, and that line has basically stayed at 2.5. If you're studying line movement, if there's no change in line movement, the majority of time that favors the favorite. I mean, if it opens at 2.5, it stays at 2.5 until the line closes. The majority of time that favors the favorite. So Houston will be our first recommended free play there. Of course, my line is -11, so we're getting a lot of value. If they win by a field goal, they win and cover. If they win by a touchdown, they win and cover. And also, too, remember with NFL, go back to the power rankings here, and this is important statistical property of NFL, which means a fact about the NFL. Teams that win in the NFL cover 80% of the time. And if you follow this channel, you've heard it, but for the new folks, we'll say it again. Teams that win in the NFL also cover 80% of the time. So in essence, in NFL, all you're doing is picking winners. So if you say, hey, I think Houston will beat Indianapolis, Houston's a better team. Well, if you believe they'll win, then there's an 80% chance they'll cover as well. So that's our first play. Let's move on to the next one here. My power rankings, Arizona and Buffalo. We have Buffalo's second best team in NFL. We have them at a power ranking of 31 versus Arizona 11. So that gives us a differential of minus 20. Now we go over here to the line. I will say this about creating a line. To make this line more realistic, this model more realistic, what I would actually do is I would cap that at probably 2 touchdowns. Meaning if I was actually creating a line, I would cap it at 14. Looking at that Arizona Buffalo, you can see that line actually opened at 7. It's gone down slightly to 6.5, but again, I still believe there's a lot of great value there with Buffalo winning by a touchdown, and that's a cover. So Buffalo is going to be my second recommended free play there. Ton of value, good team, and playing at home as well on Sunday at 1 o'clock. Let's go back to the power rankings here. We have next few games we'll take a look at. We have New England and Cincinnati. Cincinnati is 23. We have New England at 4. That gives us a difference of 19. So we have a ton of value there with Cincinnati. However, when you go over here and look at the line is minus 8.5. So it's actually a pretty good line by the books. So really not a lot of value because 8, and this is important to know, in NFL, if a line is 7.5, 8, 8.5, that's basically the same line. 9, 9.5. 7.5, 9.5 is the same line. Because any way you slice it, they're going to have to win by a touchdown and a field goal. So all that's the same line. So really, you look at my line is minus 19. I would still say to play it safe. I mean, obviously we have value, but I would say to play it safe, that would be a pass simply because they're going to have to win by 2 scores. And that's difficult to do in the NFL. All right, so let's go back to the model. A couple other ones to look at. We have Jacksonville and Miami. That one's pretty tight. Miami minus 7. My line, the books line, is minus 3. You might could make a case for Miami. The only reason I'm hesitant on that is we've had line move in favor of Jacksonville here. This line has went from minus 4 down to minus 3, which favors Jacksonville. Again, I'm recording this on Thursday, so there should be some more movement line-wise, obviously, up until Sunday. But for that reason, I'll pass on that one. Take a look at the next game. We have Minnesota and the Giants. Definitely want to look at this one. We have Minnesota at a 12 power ranking. We have Giants at a 2. So I have Giants at the second worst team via my model. So we have a 10-point difference and a line for Minnesota of minus 10. We'll go ahead and look at the books. We have really good movement. This line opened at +1 Minnesota and has moved all the way to minus 2 if you look at Bookmaker here. So we have a 3-point differential. That's really strong line movement in favor of Minnesota. So Minnesota is going to be my third free play recommendation for Sunday. So we got, and really you say, well, Minnesota's, you have them at the middle of your power rankings. Yes. However, if you take a look, we also, if you remember the beginning of it, this is sort of like the play against concept. So we're not necessarily saying, hey, Minnesota's a great team. We're basically factoring in the fact that Giants are basically near the bottom, and this is called a, quote, play against, and we have good margin, and we have good line movement. Obviously, full disclosure, that line could move, but based on what we see and the information we have so far, I didn't realize I hadn't pulled it up. We look at their Minnesota +1, now all the way at minus 2. All right, so let's go back, look at some of the rest of these games. Some of these are pretty even. Pittsburgh, Atlanta. Pittsburgh -5, so that's fairly close. I know they're underdogs in this spot here. They are +3. I would still pass on that. Denver and Seattle. Denver is a 3. Seattle is a 15. You get a -12 line for Seattle. We'll take a look at the books line here. Could definitely make a case for Seattle here. I didn't include this in my actual free play, but that line has moved to -5 up into -6. So that might be something to consider as well. In retrospect, that might be a relatively strong play now that I think about it. Because let's see, yep. Because technically Seattle's higher than Denver in that situation. Yeah, and Seattle's at home. That's always a tough place to play. So yeah, let's add Seattle then in retrospect. Not sure why I didn't include it. Let's add Seattle as our fourth free play for Sunday. And we're getting some value. So if they win by a touchdown, that will be a cover. Back to the power rankings, we have Vegas and the Chargers. Chargers is a 10 power ranking, Vegas 5. We have Chargers -5. Dallas, Cleveland, pretty even. Only a 3-point differential favoring Dallas. And then, of course, my Washington Commanders, a 6, going up against Tampa, 9. So we have Tampa at a -3. Line has moved in favor of Washington, by the way. Next one, Rams and Detroit. I think this is really relatively close as a play. You have Detroit 29 via my power rankings, 21 for the Rams. So that's a difference of -8. We take a look at the books line. Books line is Detroit -3.5. I didn't include this in my power rankings, but you definitely have some line movement already. Again, very early to assess line movement. The best time to assess line movement is near the end of or near the beginning of the game. So an example of sharp movement in this case would be Detroit's at 3.5. Let's say 30 minutes before the game kicks off, that line moves to 4, stays at 4 to close. That would be an indication of sharp movement moving in the direction of Detroit. Still did not include that as a free play simply because the Rams were way up here as well. Rams we had just outside the top 10 via my power rankings. All right. And let's take a look at, I think we have one more, Jets and San Francisco. We have San Francisco as the best team in NFL. We gave Jets a 22. Anxious to see what they do here with Aaron Rodgers back. So that gives us a differential of -10. So our line for the 49ers is -10. You can see this line opened at -6. Now it's gone down to -4.5. Again, there is value there. My line, they should win by a touchdown. But again, I would watch this line movement. Didn't include that in the free play. Only included the ones that we had. So, but definitely something to look out for line-wise. So again, just to review all this, let's go back over here to our power rankings page. So again, very simple. However you rank your teams, you rank the top team, give it a line of power ranking of 32 all the way down to 1, and you just simply subtract. That's going to give you your line, and I would say a max line of 14 would be good. So if it's anything more greater than 14, it just defaults to 14. Hope you enjoyed this. If you're a client or interested in being a client, you can get access to my entire NCAA weeks 1, 2, and 3 model that we use until the regular model kicks in. It was very profitable last week with the adjustments we made. Anxious to see how it performs this week. $1 a month gives you access to everything I just mentioned, all my lines for all sports, in addition to all my coaching videos. Greatly appreciate those of you that stayed around to the end watching this entire video. Hey, good luck this Sunday. Subscribe to the channel and talk to you guys soon. Peace.